It was a cold morning in Geneva. Cameras clicked, suits shuffled, journalists whispered. The air buzzed with polite diplomacy as world leaders gathered for what was supposed to be just another international forum. President Joe Biden entered with a calm smile. To his right sat officials from the European Union. To his left, African leaders, quiet, observant. And then there was Ibrahim Traoré, the young revolutionary from Burkina Faso. He wasn't like the others, no entourage, no long speech, just quiet eyes that had seen too much. Halfway through the forum, when the spotlight unexpectedly turned to him, Traoré stood up. But instead of reading a prepared statement, he pulled something from his coat pocket. It was a folded, worn letter. He looked at the crowd, then said softly, "I will read the words of a man whose voice was never meant to reach this room." People leaned forward, phones stopped scrolling. Biden paused mid-sip. No one knew that what would follow would change the way the world saw everything. And this was just the beginning. Traoré unfolded the letter slowly, his hands steady. The paper was stained, almost torn at the edges. He adjusted the mic. His voice didn't rise. He didn't dramatize. But what he read sent chills across the room. "My name is Michael Carter. I am a U.S. soldier. I don't know if I'll live to see this letter read out loud, but if I don't, I want someone, anyone, to hear me." The room froze. "I served in Africa, not for justice, not for peace, but for money, for contracts, for things I never understood. I was told I was a hero. But in my heart, I knew I wasn't saving anyone. I was watching people lose everything." Traoré stopped for a second, his eyes scanning the audience. Some diplomats were already shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "I met men who had nothing, but still smiled. I met women who gave me food while starving. I met children who danced even when their homes were bombed. And I knew I was the one breaking them." Silence. Traoré looked straight at President Biden. Michael wanted this letter heard, not buried, not ignored. Heard. And then, without blinking, he continued reading. President Biden had been scribbling notes on a small notepad. But by the third paragraph, his pen slipped from his fingers. He didn't pick it back up. Traoré's voice echoed, low and steady. "One night I was stationed near a village in Burkina Faso. We were told it was a high-risk zone. We entered fully armed. What we found wasn't a threat. It was a wedding." The room gasped softly. "We destroyed it. I watched a man scream over his wife's body. I watched a grandmother hold 2 lifeless children. I wasn't the only one crying, but I was the only one who wrote this." The tears started then. Not from Traoré, from an aide seated in the back row. Quiet, discreet, but real. They called it collateral damage. I called it shame. Joe Biden's lips were tight now, his eyes lowered, and then came the line that pierced the air like a knife. "The only person who looked me in the eye after that night was a local rebel. He handed me a bottle of water and said, 'Don't forget what you saw.' I never did. And that man was Ibrahim Traoré." The room erupted in whispers. And Traoré just looked down at the letter again. 2 years before the forum, Staff Sergeant Michael Carter sat alone outside a worn U.S. outpost near Djibo, Burkina Faso. His boots were muddy, and his heart was heavier than his gear. That day he had buried a child, a girl no older than 7. No name, no surviving family. A drone strike had missed its target by 300 meters and hit her home instead. Michael wasn't supposed to write what he saw. He wasn't even supposed to care. But the silence of that night was louder than gunfire. He borrowed a pen and tore a page from his field journal. "If anyone ever reads this, know I didn't sign up for this. I didn't come here to watch children die. I don't know how to carry this pain, but someone needs to." He never mailed the letter. Instead, he folded it, placed it in a sealed envelope, and handed it to the one man who had offered him truth without judgment, Ibrahim Traoré. "One day, you'll know when to read this," he told him. And Traoré, without question, nodded. The world was still 2 years away from hearing those words. Michael Carter met Ibrahim Traoré during a humanitarian standoff near the outskirts of Ouahigouya. U.S. forces had blockaded a rural village, fearing an armed ambush. Tensions were high. People were starving. The sun beat down on both sides like punishment. That's when Traoré walked in alone, wearing no armor, just a dusty shirt and calm defiance. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise a gun. He only asked one thing: "Will you feed the children before they die of hunger, or after?" Michael, watching from behind the barricades, felt something shift. In Traoré's eyes, there wasn't hate. There was grief, rage, compassion, strength. Michael had seen commanders bark orders, generals demand loyalty, but this man asked for humanity, and somehow made soldiers question their purpose. That night, Michael approached him in private. "You talk like no one else I've ever met," Traoré answered quietly, "because I've seen what silence costs us." They sat under the moon. No cameras, no protocol. Just two men from two sides of the world, broken by the same war. That's when Michael handed him the letter. For safekeeping, not for show. Neither of them knew it would one day shake the White House. Back at the forum, Traoré continued to read. The walls felt closer now. The air heavier. No one dared interrupt. Not even the translators. They stopped speaking, too stunned by what they were hearing. "I've seen medals handed to men who never saw combat," the letter read, "and silence forced on those who witnessed war's true cost." President Biden adjusted his posture. He wasn't smiling anymore. "I remember a boy who gave me his only toy, a piece of wood carved into a plane. He thought I was there to save him." That night, his entire family disappeared in a crossfire. "I never told anyone. I couldn't." Another line. Another blow to the room's fragile composure. If I could turn back time, I'd trade my stripes for that boy's laughter. But I can't. All I can do is ask one thing: please, do better than we did. Traoré paused, then looked up for the first time since he started reading. His eyes met Biden's. Calm, unshaken. And that was the moment viewers at home said they saw the shift. Not in power, but in conscience. Because it wasn't just a letter anymore, it was a mirror. As Traoré's voice carried through the marble-walled forum hall, the tension in the room thickened. Back-row diplomats exchanged glances. Some whispered into earpieces. A few tried to smile, out of habit, not comfort. But nothing could hide the shift. A French ambassador leaned toward a British envoy and muttered, "Was this cleared in the agenda?" "No," came the reply, "and it's too late to stop it now." Meanwhile, President Biden's security advisor passed him a folded note. He didn't read it. His eyes were fixed on Traoré, whose calm was unshaken, like a man who had waited years to tell the truth. "I was trained to fight enemies," the letter continued, "but no one prepared me for fighting my own conscience." The room fell back into silence, the kind of silence that stretches across nations. Ibrahim once told me, "A man becomes dangerous not when he holds a gun, but when he holds the truth and refuses to stay quiet." That's why I'm writing this. And somewhere, in the back of the room, a seasoned general, retired now, medals buried in boxes, closed his eyes and quietly wept. He remembered Michael Carter, and he remembered the child they couldn't save. What no one in the room knew, what even Traoré hadn't expected, was what came next. A pause. Then Traoré reached into a small case beside the podium. He pulled out an old mobile phone. The screen was cracked, the battery barely holding. "This was given to me 2 years ago," he said. The screen lit up. A simple audio file titled, "If I Don't Make It." He pressed play. The speakers crackled, then carried the voice of a man broken by truth, but determined to speak anyway. "If you're hearing this, I didn't make it out. Don't be angry for me. I chose to stay. I chose to serve. But there are things the world deserves to know." There were no theatrics, just a man's voice, raw and trembling. "Tell them about the little boy who held my hand after we bombed his school. He didn't cry. He just asked me if his sister was okay. I lied. She wasn't." Joe Biden leaned forward, lips parted slightly. "Tell them that Ibrahim Traoré saw us, not as enemies, but as men who'd lost our way." Then silence. A second later, the audio cut off, and a few in the room began quietly sobbing. Just when the room thought it had heard everything, Traoré turned the letter over. There was more. A second page, creased, worn, hidden behind the first. Faded ink, uneven writing, as if the soldier had written it while crying. "There was one mission we were ordered to erase from memory. A village with no name. We were told it was harboring rebels, but when we arrived, there were only families." Michael's words stung like broken glass. I tried to stop it. I begged the commander. He told me to follow orders or face charges. I watched as we razed homes, took fathers, and left children alone in the dirt. Traoré took a breath before reading the last part. One boy ran to me. He screamed, "Why are you doing this?" I had no answer. That question never left me. I still hear it, every night. And I know someday that voice will be louder than my silence. Joe Biden's hands were now clasped tightly. His shoulders sagged. That sentence, "Why are you doing this?" seemed to echo through his memory too. Because once, long ago, he had asked it himself. And now, it had returned. Traoré's voice dropped low. The room leaned in. The soldier who wrote this letter, Staff Sergeant Michael Carter, was part of a mission in 2019, one the world never heard about. The projector behind him flickered on. A single blurry satellite image filled the screen, a small village in northern Burkina Faso. Dated June 4, 2019. There were no press records, no classified leaks, not even whispers. "This mission doesn't exist in U.S. archives," Traoré said, "because it was erased." He walked to the screen and pointed to a small cluster of homes. These people were labeled militants because they resisted handing over mining rights. What happened next wasn't defense, it was destruction. Biden shifted uncomfortably. His aide tried to pull his attention away, but he didn't move. Michael Carter broke protocol. He refused to fire. He tried to protect a family. His punishment? Traoré paused. They reassigned him, silenced him. Then Traoré read Michael's words again. "That day I saw a different kind of leader, not one who threatened, one who listened. That was Ibrahim Traoré. He told us we still had a choice, to be human." Silence returned, but it wasn't quiet. It was heavy. From his coat pocket, Traoré pulled something small and wrapped in black cloth. He slowly unwrapped it. It was a U.S. military medal, rusty, scratched, partially bent. "This," he said, "was left at the grave of a girl named Awa." The room stiffened. Michael gave it to her mother. He said, "This should have been hers, not mine." A whisper passed through the hall. Some delegates covered their mouths. "I met her," Traoré said softly. "She was 10. She wanted to be a teacher. That morning, she had braided her mother's hair and said, 'I want to learn English, so I can talk to the soldiers.'" He looked straight ahead. She didn't live past noon. At that point, one of the UN representatives from an African nation quietly removed their earpiece. His eyes were red. His translator stopped talking. They didn't need words anymore. The world says these are accidents, Traoré continued. Collateral damage. He held up the broken metal. But this is not collateral. This was a child, with dreams. Joe Biden now stared at the floor, his lips pressed tightly, his knuckles white. This story, it's not about blame, Traoré said. It's about truth. As Traoré placed the medal on the podium, the room seemed frozen in time. Not a cough, not a shuffle, no blinking screens or restless typing. Just silence. Before Michael died, Traoré said, he sent this letter to 3 people, his brother, his chaplain, and me. His voice cracked, just once. He said he trusted me to read it, not just because I knew the truth, but because I had lived it. A sudden shift happened in the room, a weight. Like everyone finally understood, they weren't just listening to a speech. They were standing in the middle of a confession, a reckoning. I am not here to accuse, Traoré said. I'm here to ask. He looked directly at Biden. What happens when the truth we avoid becomes the truth that defines us? For a moment, Biden looked like he might respond, but he didn't. Instead, he reached for his glass of water and missed. His hand was shaking. He stared at it in disbelief. Across the room, one journalist whispered to another, "This isn't just a forum anymore." "No," the other replied, voice low. "This is history, and we're not ready for it." Traoré unfolded the last corner of the letter. The paper trembled slightly in his hand, not from fear, but from weight. Before Michael ended his letter, he asked something, not for revenge, not for pity, but something almost too human. He read aloud, "If anyone ever hears these words, please don't let this end with a speech. Don't let this be folded into silence like the rest. Let someone, even one person, carry this forward. That way, Awa's name will be more than a whisper in dry wind." Traoré paused, and then he wrote, "Give this to the one man I saw stand between our weapons and their people, Ibrahim Traoré." Gasps echoed across the chamber. A U.S. delegate covered her mouth, tears brimming in her eyes. "Michael saw the world as it was," Traoré said quietly. "And still, he believed it could change." Then he laid the letter down, its final lines visible under the camera lights. In that moment, something in the air shifted. It wasn't about governments anymore. It was about conscience. And it was about to break the silence that had lasted far too long. A senior official tried to break the tension. He coughed and reached for the microphone, but no words came. The letter was too raw, the truth too close. Then, unexpectedly, President Biden stood. Every camera turned. He didn't speak. Instead, he slowly walked toward the podium, the space where Traoré stood, and paused just beside him. His eyes, usually guarded, looked aged and glassy. He turned to the room and spoke just 6 words. "I should have known about Awa." A shiver moved through the audience like a wave. "I should have known what we did in that village." Then he looked at Traoré and asked, his voice trembling, Did you see her too?" Traoré nodded slowly. "I did." Then Biden did something no one expected. He lowered his head, and then he knelt, a sitting U.S. president, before the world, kneeling in front of a West African revolutionary. Not in defeat, but in grief. The room didn't move. No cameras clicked. Everyone simply watched, stunned, breathless, emotional. It wasn't politics anymore. It was human. A single photo taken that day would go on to circle the globe. President Biden kneeling, Ibrahim Traoré standing, not triumphant, but solemn. Between them, the medal, and Awa's name, now known to the world. But what the photo didn't capture was what Traoré said next. He stepped down from the podium, held the microphone gently, and turned to the cameras. To every child whose name was never spoken, this is for you. Then he looked straight into the lens. Michael's last line said, "The world doesn't need another speech. It needs a memory that doesn't fade." The room erupted, but not in applause, in tears. A UN interpreter put her head in her hands. A South American delegate openly wept. Even a seasoned journalist from Paris dropped his pen and whispered, "I came here to cover a summit. I'm leaving having watched history cry." Traoré closed the letter. "This isn't the end," he said. "It's the beginning of a memory that will not fade." And as he stepped away, one little girl's name, Awa, was now known across continents. But what came next would bring everyone to their knees. As the forum slowly emptied, something unexpected happened. A young African girl, no older than 12, stepped forward from the far end of the public gallery. She had no pass, no clearance, just a tiny voice and trembling hands. Security approached, but Traoré gently raised his hand. "Let her speak," he said. The girl clutched something tightly, a worn cloth doll with a missing eye. She walked up to the microphone slowly. Her eyes scanned the crowd, unsure, afraid. And then she said softly, "My name is Awa. My village was the one in the letter." Gasps rippled across the room. "I don't remember the soldier's name, but I remember he told me not to be scared." She held up the doll. "He gave me this and said, when people ask where you're from, say you're from the place the world forgot. But I didn't." Then she looked at President Biden. "He didn't forget me. Please, don't forget him." Tears rolled down Biden's face. Even the coldest hearts in the room were undone. And outside, thousands had gathered, watching this little girl become the voice of a buried truth. Traoré returned to the microphone one last time. He held up the letter and read its final sentence. "If you're reading this, and you still think we're fighting for freedom, ask yourself why the ones we're saving cry when we arrive." There was no applause, just silence, a silence filled with shame and truth. President Biden whispered something to his aide, who rushed off and returned with a small case. Inside was a folded American flag. Biden placed it in front of the podium. "This flag draped Michael's casket," he said, his voice breaking. "Now it belongs here, where the truth was finally spoken." One by one, world leaders stood, not to speak, not to spin narratives, but to listen, and in an act of unity rarely seen, they remained standing. For minutes, without words. Traoré didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply closed his eyes. Because it wasn't about him. It was about Michael. It was about Awa. It was about the moment when truth finally won. Not with weapons, but with words written on a torn piece of paper. By a soldier who chose to see people, not power. Months passed. But the letter didn't fade. It was published across the world, unedited. Michael's words were read in classrooms, broadcast in churches, and etched onto murals in cities that once ignored the voices of the forgotten. Awa was invited to speak at the UN, and Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't celebrate. He visited the remains of Awa's village, kneeled in the dust, and planted a tree where the letter had said, "Her mother died." He spoke only once that day. "If justice begins with truth, then may this tree be its first root." The world watched as an African leader, once dismissed, now stood as a symbol of something rare: dignity without pride, power without cruelty, and love without borders. And as for the video of the forum, it broke the internet. People didn't just watch, they cried. They shared it with their families. They whispered Michael's name. They wrote poems about Awa. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Like this video. If you believe in truth, that cuts deeper than any weapon. Comment: I remember Awa to keep her voice alive. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because the world needs more stories like this. Not hidden, not filtered, but raw, real, and remembered. Let's flood this comment section with love for Michael, Awa, and Traoré, three souls who reminded the world what it means to be human. Because stories like these, they're not just watched, they're felt.